Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch, and a lot more in the news, constantly. Um, but we're going to talk about things that's not front page news, um, that I think it's something that as preparedness-minded people, we should certainly be aware of. Many of you already are. You know, we've been focusing so much here lately on kind of geopolitical issues, obviously election issues here in the United States. Uh, you know, the things that are going on that are I guess more man-made uh, SHTF scenarios. But what about nature? What about the planet itself and the things that are happening that are more natural? And do they relate at all? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Uh, you know, it really helps when you click the like button. If you have not subscribed to this channel and you're kind of lurking in the shadows and watching, which is really okay, but if you enjoy the channel, why don't you go ahead and subscribe? Hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon off to the side, and you'll be able to receive notifications most of the time. YouTube is supposed to do that all the time, but we all know it doesn't happen. But anyways, you'll get some notifications of when I post videos on this channel. And then if it's something you really like, maybe share it with your friends and on your social media accounts. All right. So something I just briefly want to mention. My last video, I talked about the possibility of the president enacting the Insurrection Act and declaring martial law. And something happened yesterday, a tweet from him, and he said in the tweet that the whole martial law thing is fake news. Now, is it? Is this another little, mind-bending, trick that's going on? Because the whole martial law thing pretty much started with his own people, his own supporters. And now he's saying it's not true, but I found it interesting that he didn't say anything about invoking the Insurrection Act. So we'll see. At this point, I'm not really sure, and I try to figure out, why would he and his administration be doing one thing and then saying another thing? Is it just to cause confusion? If in the end they're not really going to do anything and they are going to just walk away, all this talk and everything and hyping all of their supporters up is probably going to get him viewed in a very negative way in the end if he ends up not doing anything. I don't know. Maybe he's just a human enough to be really contemplating the possibility of doing this and what the overall outcome and how much collateral damage will happen if he stands his ground and follows through with what he believes to be right. So who knows? Anyways, so on to all the natural stuff. I just to start it off, because there's so much, and I'm thinking, well, how do I get this video started? That's sometimes it's the hardest thing to do, is how to start things. A recent study came out of Chile that in the last 3 months, there were over 30,000 recorded earthquakes on the continent of Antarctica, which is extremely high, much more than normal. We already, and I've mentioned this before, according to data, this has been probably a record year for earthquakes here in the United States and all over the planet. A lot of earthquake activity, a lot of volcanic activity, a lot of hot spots where there's lava flows, and it just seems like the Earth is going through a very active stage. I think in the beginning of this happening, from what I read, it seemed to be more of bordering on the conspiracy theory. But now I think most mainstream science is at least admitting that, yeah, it does seem that the Earth is going through a pretty active stage. What does that mean for us? Honestly, I think most, at least that are willing to speak of it, or that can, would say we don't really know. Maybe that there are those that won't speak of something of this nature, might actually know what's really going on. But I think the average person and even the average scientist would say we're not really sure, because it's not just the activity when it comes to earthquakes and volcanoes. It's just activity in general, um, and from the Earth, from the sun, uh, from things going on in space. It seems like it's almost like a perfect storm, almost kind of like this whole, you know, health crisis, election crisis, uh, divide of the people, kind of like that being a perfect storm happening. We're seeing the perfect storm when it comes to the natural world. And so I just wanted to kind of bring you up to date on just some interesting things. Now, as I'm doing this, I want to throw out this kind of theory that seems to be kind of floating around online. I'm not saying that I buy into it, but I will say that it seems to be a a decent theory. Because this whole year, one question has been asked many times by folks like us is, why is all this happening? Why? Why does it seem that there's just so much craziness, that there's things that it almost seems orchestrated? It's so odd. It's like, can this all just be a coincidence? And many of us feel that there's definitely some level of orchestration of all this stuff that's happening, right? So there's a theory floating around that all this is to keep us very distracted and to keep us emotionally on edge, because they know that there's something happening naturally that can't be stopped, and so they're doing this to distract us and to kind of get us to the point that if the truth came out that there's a massive asteroid happening or a massive solar, coronal mass ejection or major earthquakes or pole shifting or something like that, then the people will be like, wow, everything else is crazy this year. Might as well just throw that one on top, kind of like icing on a cake. I don't know that that's the case. I'm just throwing that out there because, in fact, there's a lot of stuff that seems to be happening. This is something we've been talking about for over a year. We have gone into the grand solar minimum. So let's just start from there. Grand solar minimum. I don't. I mean, there's still probably some scientists out there that are denying this, but it does seem to be a growing consensus of scientists saying, yes, we're in a grand solar minimum. That's not debated. What's debated is how bad will it be? What really happens in a grand solar minimum? Is there really kind of a mini ice age that will happen? Who knows? Recently, some scientists came out and said that the sun appears to be going through a very active stage. If you remember, just about a week or so ago, we had a coronal mass ejection from the sun, that hit the Earth. It was a very small one, so it really didn't do anything. Okay, the increased some solar winds and things, but it didn't really affect us at all because it was so small. And it does appear that the sun it's kind of waking up. It's been pretty mild for several years, and it does appear that the sun is waking up, and it's expected that over the next 3 to 4 years to have some pretty significant solar activity. So there's something. Space, things that's going on in space, and not the intelligent kind. We won't go into that today. There's always people wanting to talk about that. There's been more near-Earth space objects this year, meaning asteroids, meteorites that fly by the Earth or that get really close, that have this potential of striking us. There's been more recorded this year than ever before. Maybe it's just that our technology is getting better so that we're able to see more of them. But the fact is that they say that there's been more. And of the largest ones, or the ones that's come the closest, the largest ones that's come the closest, 2 or 3 of the top 5 happened this year. So there does seem to be some kind of increase in activity when it comes to solar objects or space objects coming at the Earth. So is that something? People are wondering, is all this increase in activity of space objects coming close to us, is that predicating a very large object somewhere out there in space that they're not telling us? Who knows? You can speculate, but we don't really know. Then you look at the things here on Earth. I mentioned the 30,000 earthquakes in the last 3 months in Antarctica. Antarctica's going through some serious changes also. It's funny that over the past decade or two, we've all been just uh, this attempted brainwashing of the Earth is changing due to man-made climate change, right? Man-made global warming, and then they switched it to man-made climate change. But now we're not hearing so much about the man-made part. I mean, we do hear that a little bit, but it's interesting that it's not quite as much man-made, it's just climate change. And for instance, we've been told for years that the Antarctic ice sheet is melting at an astonishing rate, and there's worry for that of it melting and causing rapid rising of the oceans. And to my knowledge, it's always been blamed on humans, that we have caused it. Well, now recently they've discovered a large magma pocket underneath Antarctica. In fact, it's growing and it's coming to the surface as best as they can figure, and they say that it's much larger than the one in Yellowstone, the Yellowstone caldera. And so this pocket of magma is raising to the surface, and they believe that is greatly contributing to the melting of the ice there, and it would make sense, right? Ice won't stay frozen very long if you have something, hundreds or thousands of degrees beneath its surface. So that's happening. There's also a crevasse there, or the land that's starting to split, and believe that at some point it could split Antarctica into two continents, two pieces. That one I was reading the other day typically moves at a rate of 0.3 inches a year. So it widens 0.3 inches a year, and it's now expanding at a rate of somewhere around 7 inches a year. So there's movement there. We've talked about the increasing earthquake activity here in the United States and really abroad, especially in the Ring of Fire area. And for those of you that don't know the Ring of Fire area, I'd encourage you to look at that. And that's basically, if you look at a map, the Pacific Ocean, all along the coast of China and the Asian continent, up through the edges of Alaska and down the American continent coast. It's kind of the Ring of Fire, and there's been a lot of activity, a lot of strange activity going on there. So that's something. We've had more hurricanes this year than I believe ever before. If not, it's definitely number one or number two on record. Weather patterns do seem to be changing. In some areas slightly, in some areas drastically. One thing that a lot of preparedness-minded people have really been focusing on is the pole shifting. The poles move, the magnetic north poles and the magnetic south, they move all the time. They're always kind of in motion, but it's always very incremental, very small amounts. They may move millimeters a year, and now they're moving multiple feet. In fact, I was reading that just in the last couple of years, it's moved more than it has since just about they've been recording it. So it does seem to be that there's a possibility of a pole shift happening. There's also been a lot of talk in the scientific community of us going through, or in the middle of, or at the beginning of a sixth great extinction. I'm not saying that I necessarily believe all this, but I do wonder, as we see all the things that we can, as long as we trust the science and trust the people telling, the scientists speaking of it, it does seem that there is an increased activity here on this planet. What does that mean? Are we just in a normal little cycle that we go through a little few years of a little craziness, or is there some global massive shift happening in the planet? Is there something biblical going on, or is it just a normal cycle that we go through? Honestly, we don't know. I do think it's worth paying attention to, though, because some of these things, while not necessarily worth worrying over and panicking and losing sleep, I do think some of them are worth taking notice and paying a little bit of attention to, because when you see just one or two of them, it's like, well, the earth is, it's constantly changing. I mean, we know that. Climate change does exist. I don't know how much man-made of it does, but the climate is constantly in change and flux. But the question is, are we going through something major? And there is a lot of speculation to that, and there is certainly some evidence to that. So, again, there seems to be at least a segment of community online that think that it's possible that all this stuff happening, the craziness in the news, uh, maybe it's to cover up and to distract us from that. And there's other things that people think it's to distract us from, and that's the global changes is just one of them. Mostly, I want to bring these things to your attention, and because as preparedness-minded people, that's typically what most preppers start off on is natural, disasters. That's why we start prepping typically. Earthquakes, tornadoes, ice storms, snowstorms, volcanoes, hurricanes. That's usually where a prepper starts. But this year it's been different. While there has definitely been some really crazy natural disasters, massive forest fires that probably weren't all that natural, storms in the upper Midwest that we've never seen before, hurricane season that we've never seen before. Most preppers, though, in 2020, whether you are seasoned or just starting, are preppers because of the craziness that's been going on. But we cannot forget that we live on a really big planet, and that there is definitely some indication that this planet is starting to go through some massive changes. And so from time to time, because mostly I find this very interesting. I certainly have no science background whatsoever in this, but I do find this type of stuff quite interesting, probably more interesting than the political and the, that kind of stuff, economic. I find it very interesting to investigate what is going on the planet. And then sometimes we have to use our minds critically, because what we're finding out that's going on is just being filtered through news that we know absolutely is very biased and slanted, and they filter it to the point that they only let us know what they want us to know. So we have to research and find other sources, or just think through what they're telling us to determine for ourselves if it's believable, or if there may be some other reason for things happening. But the bottom line is, again, the Earth seems to be going through a cycle of change. And again, maybe this is just a normal little cycle that goes through every few generations, and we only now have the equipment to test and to know that this stuff is happening simultaneously across the planet, whereas 100 years ago, we weren't able to mass communicate in the way that we are now, so not everyone knew things were happening. Or maybe this is something massive that's happening. Maybe this is, something like, say, the Great Flood, or, some other catastrophic event in our past that we are now experiencing in our life. And maybe there is some biblical connection to this. Again, there's a lot of hypothesis that's going on. But I just today wanted to bring this to you and get the discussion going. I think videos like this are good to get your voice heard in the comments. So I would encourage you to leave comments, drop links, as long as it's related to this subject. I'm open to hear your point of view, and if it's better than mine, I will admit to it. If I'm wrong, I will admit to it. But so let's get this conversation going. What do you think about the global change, the things that are happening on this planet that are not related to humans, that are just related to its natural change? All right, folks, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.